Get ready for the ochelli-effect. The most underrated voice in all media. The alternative's alternative. Chuck Ochelli.
June 27th, 2016, according to that thing we call a calendar. And I'm not going to be able to maintain that voice, so hell with it. Anyway, this is the Ochelli Effect, broadcast live on American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Perhaps I will slip back into my announcer voice later, but I can't hold it together, man. Not long. Not without being paid anyway, which, by the way, I am available for voiceovers. But anyway, it is a Monday.
That was great.
You know, I feel like going, in a world where, whatever, like those movie trailers, I can't do it. I don't know how those guys maintain that. The John B. Wellses of the world, they have that incredible, like that dude's voice is just frightening, right? It's just, caravan to midnight, I can't even drop that octave anymore, before the throat surgery.
That's pretty good still.
Yeah, there you go. And that giggling voice you hear, of course, is Sherri Wisdom, who is with me tonight. And we do welcome you, by the way, to American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com, where the live show originates from. And there are many, many platforms, apparently, where we're beginning to appear as a podcast, etc. Even those of you listening on TuneIn, check it out. If you actually just do a search now for the Ochelli Effect on TuneIn, a lot of past shows are now being added to that particular applicable application. So, anyway, enough of all that. What are we here to talk about tonight? If I can stop tripping over my lips, I'm watching this whole thing emerge with Brexit, right? And in the second hour, we're going to have from Raconteurs News, okay, RN, Tony Hurst and Andy Younger is going to join us, both of them, in the second hour and give us a perspective which is definitely, decidedly not American. And that'll be helpful because I got to be honest with you, when you talk to American people about this concept of Brexit or what's going on with the European Union, the truth is we don't know anything about it. Now, here's the funny part. I'm looking online. And right after the referendum was apparently passed, although has not been ratified by the political machinery over there in England at this time, although it hasn't been ratified, it has been passed. A whole lot of people in Great Britain were Googling, what is the European Union? What? They don't know the system they're under. It's absolutely horrifying. And, of course, we've been talking about this stuff for years and years. As I mentioned to you, Sherri, off the air this weekend, it's weird because this is exactly the stuff we were talking about regarding the New World Order, regarding this unification in a regional sense across the globe, the African Union, the North American Union, the South American Union, the Asian Union, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these things having come to fruition more definitely in recent years, right? But they didn't start in the 1990s. They didn't start at the turn of this particular century that we're in now. They didn't start then. If we take a little look back, we discover that the European Economic Cooperative was something that really, as far as I can tell anyway, based on looking at the after effects of the Treaty of Rome in 1957, was established almost right after that. Now, of course, England was not a signatory to the Treaty of Rome, so it makes for an interesting position. First time that I saw that they were engaged in applying to become part of that economic cooperative was 1963, interesting year. But and they did not get in because they were actually vetoed by France's then controller, Mr. de Gaulle, right? Interesting. Again, they apply a few times, and in 1975, I guess they were actually accepted into what then did morph into the European Union. Now, the euro and that monetary system only having emerged in recent years. Is everybody confused yet, by the way? I am.
Oh, I'm thinking, I didn't know all of this. I'm actually kind of, I didn't realize that they were separated. I assumed that they were a part of it from the start. So this is good information.
Well, there you go. And look, even if you take a look to, there's a bunch of different sources about this, and you could just say, turn around and enter into your search engine, what is Brexit? Now, I don't often like to look at things like the New York Times, but I do scan it. And they actually had a pretty concise little representation so that you could sort of explain it to the uninitiated. What is Brexit? Well, look, directly, it's what it looks like. One of these conjunctions, one of these, composite words that's made up of two different sentiments, right? You have Britain, which is the BR, and then exit. Literally, that's the word contained in the word, right? And that is exactly what it means. This is the concept of Britain exiting the European Union. So if we go to the New York Times and we go just a little bit past that, there was a June 23rd referendum asking voters, should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave? Now, you would expect, as somebody who thinks of world governments as, colluding political establishments that are controlled by greater corporate interests, the global corporation, et cetera, you would think that there is no way in hell that England would step outside of the European Union, right, Sherri? Tell me I'm, out of my mind here, but isn't that about where most of us would stand on this issue?
Well, it just seemed, I think you're right. Yes, it was shocking, but then it brought up so many of the issues that you're talking about now. I think it's fabulous. But yes, definitely a shocker.
Another weird thing, here's another weird aspect to it. They had sort of this public demonstration now. You remember a character named Bob Geldof, Sherri?
I don't, but that doesn't mean anything.
Okay, I'll take you back in time just a little bit to 1985, and there was something called Live Aid. Now, does the name Bob Geldof ring a bell?
Yes, the ding, got it, okay.
Okay, the Boomtown Rats guy, that was the name of his band. He was one of the people that organized the Intercontinental concert there, which was both held at Wembley Stadium and also at RFK Stadium in America in 1985, Live Aid. Okay, at the time sort of described as the Woodstock of our young generation. I was 13 years old at the time. Anyway, I got to tell you that I was lucky enough to get there and got to see, Judas Priest at 7 o'clock in the morning and Black Sabbath, God help me, at 11 a.m. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. But let's put that aside a moment. Here we have someone who is very liberal, let's just say, Mr. Geldof, is actually on the side of England remaining in the European Union and was part of this sort of demonstration on the Thames River where they put out these flotillas a few days before the referendum was held. Were you aware of that?
No, I did not. I know. I'll be honest with you. This kind of came as a blind side to me. I've been so involved in some other things in other countries that I hadn't been paying attention. And all of a sudden it was like, bam, there it was.
Well, see, that's why I'm taking this first hour to go through it, because to be honest with you, until I started really digging on it, I didn't understand exactly how deep all this went. But I was still shocked, even on the surface, what was happening. Anyway, the pro-Brexit advocates, and I'm reading from the New York Times website here regarding this, the pro-Brexit advocates have framed leaving the European Union as necessary to protect or perhaps restore the country's identity, its cultural independence, and its place in the world. The argument is often expressed by opposition to immigration. Okay. Now, Remain supporters typically argue that staying in the Union is better for the British economy and that concerns about migration and other issues are not important enough to outweigh the economic consequences of leaving. Now, normally, I would not be on the side of those who are yelling and screaming about immigrants coming into their country, but unfortunately, I find myself, very much, again, in an uneducated fashion, drawn to the side of being in support of the English people who don't want to be part of the massive machinery of the European Union. How do you feel about it, just with the, limited information you have, Sherri?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, yes. I mean, I think if it's true, if they're really stepping out of the European Union and trying to become sovereign, well, then I think that's fabulous. I find it hard to believe. I for whatever reason, and I'm not saying that I am the know-all, but it just seems like to me, and not necessarily because of the European Union, it's because of the small amount of research that I've done, I have found out that the European Union is also financed and running through the same systems that we are here in America with the central banking. And so, to me, what Britain is saying is they're kind of, they may be giving the powers that be a big FU.
Right, that's what it seems like. Now, here's the interesting thing when we take a look at the mainstream spin on this, all right? Now, here's where we go off into Never Never Land because, of course, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of these things are organs of the global elite and are absolutely under control of the intelligence agencies at all times. And they're nothing but cheerleaders for the military-industrial complex. Now, all of that having been said, here is how they characterize the debate. Ready? The debate has also cut along the country's famously deep class divides. Voters with less money and education are more likely to support leaving the Union. Okay. Let's stop right there. We know that this is spin, this is garbage coming from the mainstream as usual. The truth is that often when there is an assertion of national identity, when there is an assertion of cultural sovereignty, not just individual sovereignty, but cultural sovereignty, when a nation says, look, we are who we are, and we should not become a part of the great global corp, immediately the characterization is these people are not educated very well, and of course they don't have very much money, so they don't have much skin in the game. They're not very important in the debate. They're attempting to marginalize the will of the people here, the way I see it. Sherri, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think you tagged it when you said, let's hit the people where we have the most prejudice. And where is that? In poverty, right? Because if people are in poverty, well, then they're in survival and they're not going to be making very wise choices and all these other things. And then also it's like, well, there's some levels and classes that see people in poverty as well. Somehow they just didn't do it right. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, it's such a judgment level. So when you can start throwing those kind of things out there, it's about perfect, right? And especially with something like this, because they're not going to let it. I mean, it would be, I think that they probably assumed that the people would grasp on to the few benefits that they have through the European Union and not see beyond that. Because why would they even put it up for a vote and then retract it and go through all this stuff? Like what? They're making such a mockery. They're going to cause a revolution over there.
Well, and what's interesting, things that are being pointed out in the chat room right now as we're having this discussion is, of course, this vote has not been ratified fully, so it's not a reality just yet. The debate is still on. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that, of course, the departure represents a whole lot of different things, okay? It's not merely an economic concern, but there's a whole lot more to it. Okay. Another thing is that very smartly, somebody named Gary in the chat room said that the truth is that the arguments for and against are all just basically a mass distraction, which, as per usual, this is no surprise, and nobody knows what they voted for. If you take a look at the algorithms on the Internet, immediately after this vote was cast by the Parliament, the citizens in the United Kingdom are Googling, what is the European Union? What? They don't even know.
That's horrifying. I mean, I know that we said that before, but to me, I mean, it's no different anywhere in the world. But here, how can they say that they took a vote? How can they say that they are now like, how could any of it be happening at all if the people that are supposedly making these decisions don't even know what's going on? Because, and then everyone wants to cry about the government being in control.
Right.
What?
But see, here's the spanking that now belongs to the American listener who is thinking themselves superior in some way to the English. Bottom line, do you know anything about what has been done in Congress this week?
Oh, Chuck, don't get me started on that because, last week was my big rant about the electoral votes. And I was shocked to find that, 9 out of 10 people didn't know what it was? They had heard of it but didn't understand it?
But hey, look, let's put the brakes on that. The electoral vote's one thing. I'm saying that the people that are literally deciding the fate of the legal status of many things across the country on a national level, the laws that are being passed, the votes that are being cast constantly, even though you do have television access to it via C-SPAN, et cetera, on the internet, whatever else, tell me that there's even a handful of Americans who are actually even passionate about the situation that know a damn thing about any of the bills that have been passed. And I'll tell you what else. Here's another fun fact. Find me a congressman that's actually read any of the stuff they voted on. Okay? No. They're reading staff summaries based on who knows what. And the people who are upset about the laws or upset about the actions know that the Congress is corrupt and everything else. We have no idea what the hell they're doing.
You just hit it. And I have said this before, too, and I fall out of it because I get swept up, too. They do throw so much out there that it's very easy to be diverted from exactly where you're at. And you're right, like going into your own city council, going to your own finding out what's happening in your own areas is, I think people would be shocked, first of all, but they'd also be surprised at how much influence they can have by just showing up to a meeting. I mean, it's like, I guess, and I think that it was you and I who had talked about this before, just calling somebody and just saying, hey, this is what's going on, tell me what's happening, or tell, that kind of thing. And you get a lot more than just trying to put them into an elite group, I think.
Well, there is that, but of course, we are talking about this one particular situation, but I mean to tell you that I can make this blanket statement that the majority of those people who are going to be affected by the laws have absolutely no clue as to the contents of them, as to when they're being voted on, as to who has voted for them. They don't even know, as they go out to cast these votes that they're going to do in November, which congressmen have actually supported things they care about or anything else. They're generally bought off by what is fed to them in the mainstream media. Yeah, I spent time to intentionally put that there. That is exactly what even the most allegedly well-informed alternative person is doing, even out there, when they're sitting there making a lot of character judgments about individuals who are allegedly holding these offices. Okay, they know nothing. They absolutely know nothing. And here we go again. The European Union, this whole concept of remaining as part of a collective, okay, which is something that I must confess also I am not exactly well informed on. But then again, we have aspects of a North American Union in place right now, which has not been thoroughly formalized, but right now. And tell me, does anybody actually out there have any clue about any of that either?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Chuck. I didn't until we talked over the weekend, and you had, we had been talking about this, and you kind of expanded the whole thing, and I was surprised. You gave me a list. It wasn't just like, oh, we have one union here or one union there. It was like they are trying to spread out this union and kind of create a collective, but they're still all the same, right? Is that how you described it?
Well, it's a bunch of precursors to unifying the one world government concept. See, and here's the thing. Actually, the idea that this vote even came about and became public knowledge and has been part of the discussion sort of spits in the face of the concept that there's absolutely nothing we can do about it, that there will be no resistance to it. And this is the sentiment I'm going on here. But the problem is that, quite honestly, I don't have the full range of I understand how a lot of these things started to come together. There were various treaties, economic decisions that were made. We had NAFTA and GATT and all these other interesting things, right? The TPP, still nobody seems to be able to sort all that out, except I've been able to figure out that you have no recourse in a legal sense when it comes to decisions being made. But all of that aside, there is a globalization of economic concerns that is emerging constantly, and what's actually behind all of it at the end of the day?
Ta-ding. It's the world banking system, right?
That's the way that I see it. Again, I could be part of that uneducated, poor mass, which I definitely am.
I don't think so, but I don't want to claim to know, and I think this is what's going to be exciting about the second hour is we will get the inside skinny, probably, but to me, that's exactly every rabbit hole that I dove into, and I think, I know Jillian's not on with us, but she would say the same thing, because her and I, over the weekend and throughout the last week, we were both looking and researching, and it was like every single time, and I don't know if it's appropriate for me to go into where else it hit, but it seemed like it was the world banking system and pedophiles, which sounds crazy. Like when both of us first started seeing this kind of stuff, I truly was like, there's no way. That's such crap. You hear all this conspiracy stuff. This is not going on. In my mind, I just can't grasp a hold of it. But
well, look, it just keeps coming up. I mean, how are you going to deny the pattern? I loved what Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain had to say regarding history. It may not always repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And this is what we discover over and over again. All right, and of course I paraphrased that, but the deal is that this is what keeps emerging, right? Have you ever heard of the Franklin cover-up, by the way?
I have, but you have to remind me because my brain is kind of on overload these days.
Centering on the Franklin Savings and Loan thing, and it turns out that there was actually a predatory child pedophile prostitution ring that tied directly to the power elites in America, and of course every investigative reporter that's tried to unearth the real facts regarding this has mysteriously met an odd end, and that's just the way it goes. But it seems as though over and over again, in the age of a lot more readily available information, we seem to keep discovering these patterns of pedophilia, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and all of it tied to, some sort of money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. And those who are the middle managers are often caught up in a blackmail sense regarding exactly these subjects. And yet, who's talking about it?
That's the thing. That's like so I may have told you this yesterday, but I'm going to repeat it anyway because I was shocked. Like I told you, first of all, when I first started, finding these different things, like I really in my own mind wanted to deny it. But anyway, it turns out that when you were initially talking about the European Union coming in like the 1970 whatever it was, the guy that brought that in, and I can't remember his name because I am not good with that, but the guy who was in charge and brought that in, if you type in his name in parentheses, put an and then put in parentheses pedophile, you'll find out that he was charged on 4 or 5 different cases with boys between the ages of 13 and 15 of sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, still, he's that never really, it's obviously you can Google it, but something never came about with that, right? And it seems to tie into the whole thing with the control. So then all this comes out, and then all of a sudden the European Union is in. I mean, doesn't that... I don't know.
That's what it is. It never quite metastasizes into anything meaningful, right? So the public never actually gets to hear all of the, it sort of just goes out into the wind and then becomes fodder for conspiracy theory ever after because, hey, after all, there is no real solid evidence to relate it to, but keeps happening over and over again. And it's not just in Europe and it's not just in America. I mean, go to Oceania, you'll see that, guess what? In Australia, they've got a whole slew of this kind of stuff too. It seems as though everywhere you turn where the corridors of power exist, there are wounded and abused children lurking in those hallways. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And you go straight, through the Vatican system. You go straight through the power corridors anywhere. What do you never want to get caught with? Well, either a dead girl or a live boy. This is the reality.
Yeah, you just hit it. And I was just, again, shocked but also confirmed that it is all connected somehow. And I wish, and I don't know how much, I don't want to really put us on the spot, but I would like to know and understand more about the European Union because, and I've said this before, my experience with it is totally different than what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. And that's probably because I was exposed in a way, like I have a friend who's actually a part of the European Union, and but I think basically he's in a kind of a position of where he's bringing in new ideas and he's doing all this stuff because they've set up a program to do that, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean that represents, I guess I thought that, this is how naive I was, I thought that that's how the whole thing was.
Well, and the other oddity here is, of course, when we turn back to the mainstream interpretation once again, which we've already identified as a great weapon of mass distraction. Here we go again, quoting from the New York Times. Neither side is defending the European Union as a meaningful or admirable institution. Here they give you some truth. In part, this speaks to particularly British views that the rest of Europe is somehow alien. So we're going to seize back upon the whole, xenophobic aspect of it. Of course, you would have to be a xenophobe to not want to be part of the grand European Union and the one world government. But anyway, that's my commentary. Back to it. This also reflects the Euroscepticism. Interesting word. Euroscepticism or opposition to the European Union rising across the bloc as the Union veers from crisis to crisis. In this way, the Brexit vote is a particularly noticeable manifestation of a sense that European institutions have fallen short of their lofty promises and have created burdens, such as absorbing migrants or bailing out troubled economies, that many Europeans are tired of bearing. Okay. Now, Section 2, what is the case for leaving? And I love this, by the way. A lot is implied in one of the campaign's slogans, take control, in quotes. Britain's loss of full authority over its economic policies and regulations has so rankled many of the country's citizens that it has spawned an entire genre of urban legends over the years called Euromyths. Okay. Let's stop right there. Interesting, again, wow. That, of course, those that believe that there is a problem here, that you would want to take control, that you would want to maintain the sovereignty of a nation, okay, in the face of the great consumption, the great Borg entity of Global Corp, assimilating everybody into, see, the thing is, if they assimilate regionally, you have the European Union, you have AFRICOM, which of course is meant to later on turn into the African Union, you have the Asian Union, you have the North American Union, you have the South American Union. So once you have these continental concerns all put together, it makes it even easier to create cooperations between the larger entities, which would then bridge other gaps, and then who knows, maybe we would have a West and East. Or North and South, who knows? It doesn't matter which way you want to draw the line on the globe. I guess I think East and West would probably be more effective because you could separate continental concerns a little easier that way. But when you think about it, this falls right in line with what, all of us crazy conspiracy people have been talking about for a long time. Now, back to this whole thing. Here we go. These stories usually feature some aspect of classically British culture that is supposedly under threat. One claimed that double-decker buses were to be banned, while another suggested that fish and chips would have to be written in Latin on menus. The subtext is barely subliminal at all. Gray-suited Brussels bureaucrats are the enemy of Britishness. A threat to Britain's identity is in all its deep-fried double-decker glory. That is literally a quote from the New York Times.
Good. I mean, do people realize how that makes them sound like they are so petty when you actually, I mean, like you said before, like it's kind of a slap in the face, it seems like.
Well, dumb, uneducated, and poor Brits are just concerned about their double-decker buses and their fish and chips, Sherry. Don't you know that?
Oh, I mean, really? Like, that's the whole, but you know what? People will grab onto that because we really don't know, and it doesn't affect us, so what do we care? Right? They don't realize that it does affect us because here's the whole thing that is grabbing a hold of me, and I'd love to hear what you think of this. When I started digging into this and I realized that the European Union is once again connected to that central world banking system, right? Mm-hmm. There are only 4 countries in the world. In the whole, there's so many countries, and there's only 4 in the whole world that are not involved in that system, right?
Right. At any given time, there are, depending on the coups and et cetera, somewhere between 180 and 200 nations that are recognizable on the planet as separate sovereign entities. And, of course, the U.S. military empire is present in something like 175 of them. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you think about that, and then, okay, so to me, right away, and I think you and I even had this talk, is that we're at war with every single country that's not involved in this union, right, or this money system. It's not really the European Union. That's just one side of it. Like you're saying, it seems like it's a branch kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But here's what I find fascinating is, so then what is going to happen with Britain? Because if Britain is taking out of the Union, does that mean that they're bailing out of the money system as well? Or am I just making that up? That would seem like a tie, but, I don't think it makes it mandatory, but if they're talking about taking back their sovereigns and making their own money and this and that, doesn't that pull them out of the Rothschild, Rockefeller, whatever?
Well, you would think so, except that the British Crown is effectively controlled by this. And, and then you got to see, that's the thing. We don't necessarily even understand the system. Okay. And the international banking cartel, which is what I call them. Of course, some people would identify part of that as the IMF. But the international banking cartel, what happens when somebody tries to extract themselves? Well, ask a guy named Muammar Gaddafi how well that went. This guy was turning around trying to give loans to other African nations with no interest, okay, and trying to get a gold-backed dinar that would be useful in the at least in the adjacent nations and things like that to him. Actually going to a gold standard. Hello? That thing that we completely departed from in 1971. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Tony Hurst is in the chat, and he's going to be on with this the next hour, and he just said, no, Sherry, and that must have been about the comment that I had, the question I was asking you. So I'm going to be fascinated to hear what he says, too.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to what Tony and Andy have to say about this. We have definitely talked our heads off during this hour so far about it. And here we go. We're actually speculating a lot. We're actually speaking, without really proper perspective in a lot of cases. But what is it that one can witness from a distance? It's very strange to me that there would be even this vote would come up. Now, of course, here's the thing. This can all die on the vine without any sort of problem. Right. It doesn't have to get become part of the situation. And, if they extract themselves from the European Union, do they actually remove themselves from the use of the euro, okay, which is the monetary denomination in the European Union, right, which most famously was bandied about as a great place to invest your money because it was worth a hell of a lot more than the dollar when it first emerged. I don't know what the exchange rate is now, but based on the fact that they've taken hits after bailouts of places like Greece and Cyprus and the other calamities that seem to have struck this European Union over and over again in a monetary sense, it seems interesting to me that the same strategy has been played out over and over again, where, you have basically, let's look at it this way, the haves and the have-nots among the states or nation states in the collective. There is an effort to sort of bail out different areas because of natural disasters, economic woes that have struck them, whatever else, and these things become burdens upon the others. This is a constant thing that seems to emerge. And then it is compulsory for the allegedly richer nations to prop up and support the others, which then drains their wealth, right? And look, the United States in recent years has lost its credit rating, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, we're still the greatest global funder of other governments for whatever purposes they may be, over and over again, making deals with the IMF, at a point where we're so buried in debt, we're bailing out our largest financial institutions after the economic crash, that we went through in 2008, once again, still subsisting in the zombie economy, which is exactly what a phrase I coined, which is kind of interesting that nobody else did that before me, apparently. But the reality is that I think the U.S. economy died in 2008, and it's still walking around and moving about, but it is very much a zombie in that it is not really living tissue any longer, but appears animated to the most, shallow observer. But isn't this exactly the same kind of thing that gets done whenever you're being sapsucked, I have no other term for it, by all of these other compulsory causes that are then put into your billing system, let's just say, and therefore it creates a drain on the treasuries, whatever they may be, that you have in a particular place, and just does it to the point where after a while you become equal to those that you were trying to help up, and everybody seems to be broke. I mean, there is not a nation on the planet, apparently, that is not operating at a deficit, that is not in debt, et cetera, except for the couple that maybe are not playing in the IMF casino. And what happens to those guys? Like I say, once again, take a look at Muammar Gaddafi, take a look at the reality of the Iraq War, the fact that there was a push going on there where maybe he wasn't going to play with the banks anymore, even though he had been a CIA asset previous to that and everything else. And, of course, I am talking about, that harbor of terrors, Saddam Hussein. Every time one of these guys tries to step outside of the IMF, and again, Syria, another interesting example, because they didn't want to necessarily play the game, and the next thing you know, they're the new demon on the block.
There's only 4 left, right? Or I think you might even be the one who told me that. But there was 6, however, not that many years ago.
Well, you told me 4. Yeah, you told me 4, and I told you there was 6. Take a look at the last 2 to fall.
Yes! God, that was horrifying. Again, because it just goes to show you how it really is all connected. So, people can say, well, it's not important that we know about what's going on over there. It's none of our business, blah, blah, blah. It is our business because we are all connected. And people can say, well, the one world order is coming. It's already here. If we have one world banking system and there's only 4 countries in the world that are not being run by the same money system, what do people think that means? I mean,
exactly my contention is that, this is coming, this is coming, this is coming. It's already here. Yes. I think that's extremely accurate, Sherri. It is already here. It's already happened. And like I said, once again, now how did it happen? Well, we can look back to what we were talking about before, where you have the population uninformed about the laws, the deals that are being made. Our friend who's running for president now, who's supposed to be, the man behind the art of the deal and all that, watch out for how those deals get made, because, a lot of the entities that he was making deals on behalf of seem to go bankrupt. But anyway, even though the president is not supposed to hold the purse strings in this country, but hey, why bother with details like that while we're having political discussions? But anyway, go ahead, Sherri.
Well, I think it's funny that, again, when we're talking about our systems, because one of the other things that I found fascinating, and I'm not sure if maybe if you're aware of this, and maybe it's just me, maybe I just didn't know, but when I tried to find out who the electors are for each state, right, because when you look at those maps, it shows you that each state is assigned, however many, whatever, and it equals up the 500 and whatever, right? So I'm looking that up, and every time it went to a senator. Well, it boldly, and I'm like, wait a second, because in the very first sentence or paragraph of the electoral, explanation, it says that it cannot be anyone who is a senator or part of Congress. So why does it go? When you're searching this through Google, why is every time it takes you to the senator of that state? It doesn't ever tell you who the actual elector is.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And Sherri, what's wrong with you? Don't you know that contradictions are absolutely logical?
I know. Sometimes I just try and, step out of that box and somebody needs to slap me around or something. I get it.
You forget. It just because it makes sense doesn't mean it's part of our reality. I mean, come on. What's wrong with you?
Seriously. It's like it seems like sometimes when I am diving into these rabbit holes that's exactly right. Like, we really are living in Alice in Wonderland. It's like when you start looking at how some of these things have been operating and how they really work, it's like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, and the reason that it's happening is because it's just like you had said. Nobody knows about it. Nobody's finding out. Nobody's actually talking to these people who are making the decisions for all of us.
Well, what was an interesting thing that I could not find in my searches and my research immediately was, I could find all sorts of discussions regarding NATO and what the commitment would be based on that particular treaty from various European countries. I cannot find a place where the European Union makes decisions regarding war powers. Now, maybe I missed it. But interesting times we live in, of course, because we've been in the longest-lasting engagement in U.S. history in a place called Afghanistan. That's right, it has absolutely overshadowed the Vietnam conflict, which, again, was not a declared war either. And no declaration of war, no use of anything except the War Powers Act and executive decision. So, wait a minute, I thought only Congress could declare war. I must be misreading my Constitution again.
It's like every time you turn somewhere, it's like, how can they get away with that?
Well, like our friend Barry there said, I have a pen and I have a phone. So there you go, end game, folks. I guess that's all you need is a BlackBerry, a phone, and the alleged mantle of the office of president to do whatever the hell you want. That's a whole other interesting story.
Wow, yeah.
But what happens in regard to the European Union? when it comes to that, right?
Yes.
Where do you go? What does that mean, right?
I mean, I really don't. I mean, I don't get it. I don't want to even try and pretend like I have some kind of smarts about this, because it does seem like in the research I do, of course, I do get dropped down some rabbit holes, and so I'm probably, have a bias already. But it seems like I don't understand how it is that they have thought it was a great idea. I mean, and when you talk to people over and that are involved in the European Union, like they support, like there's a lot of support. But when you hear because they supply all your medical and this and that and blah, 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 but your tax levels are so incredibly high and your cost of living is so incredibly high that even though you have all your necessities in some ways provided, there's no room for anything else, which that to me is keeping everyone at the same level of poverty, no matter how much you make. And on top of it, like if you decide that you don't want to vaccinate your children, well, guess what? You're part of the union. You're part of this, and they get to decide for you because they pay your bill, and so they can take your kids from you.
Well, and see, we have that kind of thing here too as well. I mean, if you don't vaccinate, now there are some states where they won't allow you to have the food stamps, which, there is a huge number of people in this country that are on food stamps, and not because it's just a glorified, wonderful thing to have, but because it's a necessity at this point because of the cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. And meanwhile, they'll threaten your benefits that are absolutely essential, if you don't comply. And that's what it's all about. I think that a lot of the European populations have been fully bullied into, listen, you guys have been suffering a long time. We have the solutions for you. And quite honestly, if you're no longer going to have to, suffer without some sort of health care, okay, if you're no longer going to have to suffer without government support, if you're going to get some sort of relief, all you have to do is comply. How many people are going to just, but bend over and take it? They're just going to do it because they don't want to suffer anymore. They've been absolutely bullied. And the same thing is happening in this country right now.
Well, and that I think a lot of people don't realize that, and that's where I'm seeing a lot of different connections, is that it seems like what we're seeing and kind of, ridiculing, we really are still living it here as well. If you look at the levels of and the people that are living on a below poverty income, I think people in other countries might be shocked to find out the percentage of Americans that are living in that. The difference is that it's not like in other countries where, you go and eat rice and beans because you get, the government is more than happy to give you food stamps or this and that, because just like you're saying, that way they can control the populace. They can make sure that you're getting your injections and you're going to the doctors and you're taking your prescriptions and, doing all of the things, and that they have complete track of your income and everything that you do, they can trace. I mean, it just seems so phenomenal. And the bonus to this is that in America, and I'm just dying to ask Tony about this when he gets on, almost every single government agency that I have researched, I have found to actually be privately run by an individual corporation as opposed to a government agency.
Yeah, everything from the IRS, okay, to the distribution hubs for the Department of Agriculture, which do run the food stamp programs, all of it, all the way down to your DMV, all seem to be privately run corporations that you have to contract with, in order to participate. That's the reality, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, well, and and the thing is that again, it's like I can only relate this, to my own experience, and so, one of the things I've been saying for years is, in our judicial system, you get as much justice as you can afford. right? And it's
True.
pretty much, and that's every single system, though. It's like, I watch some people, and they learn how to play the system, and they're living high off of food stamps and Section 8 and Leap, and there's like all these different things. They can have free cell phones. I mean, there are ways, if you know about it, to get everything pretty much paid for you in the United States as long as you don't have any income. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they find out about it, but it's like it's just out there somehow.
Yeah, I have to really ashamedly admit that I'm somewhat envious of the people that figure out how to do that without doing anything, because they just do it somehow. I mean, I don't know.
Generation. I mean, excuse me. I mean, you see some of these, and I know some personally because of my past experience in my job field, but where they are literally family generations. It's like the mother produces so many children because you get so much money per child, and then when the oldest child is old enough to start producing children, then she starts producing children, and the grandmother takes care. I mean, it's seriously like a business. Mm-hmm. And they can make. I mean, if you figure if they get, I don't know the amounts, but it's probably close to $1,000 in benefits per child, and you've got 8 or 9 kids running around. I mean, and all your medical is free, and you're getting food stamps, and your housing is super cheap, and all these. I mean, you are living high, right?
Well, it's not bad when you don't have to work for it. And I've actually taken a look at some of the experimentation in other countries where they're talking about giving a guaranteed income, where there is just simply a baseline that everybody works from. And that's an interesting point of commerce. Of course, that speaks to another problem, which is inflation. And I got to tell you, I don't know what the solution is when it comes down to it, because, even as I speak personally, right, fact is, I mean, without the generosity of some people recently, I would not have had food in my belly at all. Without the help from people who have gone to my website and things like that and have actually donated something, I would have been just starving trying to do what I'm doing. And
even it doesn't matter. See, that pisses me off, because the whole thing about the system is it's supposed to be, and I'm not going to try and bust you out here about being, having a disability or, whatever the deal is, because the thing, but the bottom line is that's what the whole system is for. It's to actually provide for people so that they can have a standard of living that is normal, just like everybody else's, when they have whatever is, seen as or feasible that puts them in a position of where they can't really do it for themselves. That's the whole idea of the system. But see, that doesn't work at all, because you don't get it. And I can tell you that somebody like myself, and I'm not whining by any means, but I'm a single mom of 2 kids. You think they won't give me anything, because if you make, if you actually have a job, and I'm not saying, that if you make a certain amount of money that you should even be applying, but it's like if you even try and get support, like trying to get child support or trying to get things that the government says that they'll help you with, without even any kind of benefit, no way. They're not going to help you. If you make, and I wish I could remember the exact amounts, but I want to say it's if you make over $1,700 a month. Well, you can hardly rent a place and pay your bills for $1,700 a month in the state of Colorado right now. What the hell are they talking about?
Well, and even in, say lower economic communities like where I'm sitting in the South, to be honest with you, you go over something like $700, that they think that you've taken in a month, no matter how you've taken it in. And, you're therefore disqualified from a bunch of different things. And $700 is not something to live on.
What are you supposed to do with that? You can't even eat. And they're like, oh, well, we'd hate to see people eat cat food. Well, what the F are you supposed to eat when you have 49 cents to your name?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I would love to be able to afford cat food sometimes.
Oh my God, Chuck!
Look, but that's the truth, man.
Actually,
pet food's kind of expensive.
Yeah, you don't buy that. I think the horrifying thing to me is, like I said, is you see some of these, and unfortunately it is a kind of a teaching, because a lot of them are these young girls who haven't, for whatever reason, either pursued some type of career or whatever it is, and so basically they have a baby, or they have two babies, maybe even three, and all of a sudden the state is supplying for them, and there's two things. I guess if they're being like a rockin' mom and they're really home and they're really doing all that, well, I'll give mine, you know what I mean? But if you've got people who, she's got a boyfriend who's making $25 an hour because he's working construction, and, you know, they're all rocking in new cars and getting their nails done, and the kids are wearing, you know,
well, you know, I understand this, Sherri, but look, we're going to go to break. Sherri Wisdom is with me here on the Ochelli-effect, and we'll be right back here on American Freedom Radio. Stay tuned, guys.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. American.
It's practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
People are dumb. You can say what you want about this country, and I love this place. I love the freedoms we used to have. I love it. I love that. You know? I love it when it didn't take catastrophe to get us to care for one another. I love the fact that we're on camera all the time from all angles. But you know what? You can say what you want about America. And I say I love this place. I wouldn't have it any other way. Wouldn't live in any other time in history in any other place. But say what you want about America. Land of the free, home of the brave. We got some dumbass people floating around this country. Yeah. And it's me that only a really low IQ population dandy.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of election, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
Everything we want to sit and right in our midst, but we don't really give a fuck, that's the twist. Once you fall into the trap, it's a bitch. Somebody took a bullet for your right to exist. When they slide that by you, they give you a rifle, your G.I. Joe. Hold on to your Bible, it's about survival. That is what it's free.
It is definitely about survival, Payday Monsanto. And this is the second hour of the Ochelli-effect broadcast live on American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback in my headphones at the moment. Okay. And as we go further here tonight, we are discussing Brexit and the whole vote with the European Union. And, of course, I wanted to bring two of my friends here who have been on the show before from Raconteurs News, the RN that you see, the black RN on the orange background. Although I'm getting quite a bit of background noise from Mr. Hurst at the moment, which I'm sure you guys can hear. Look, it's live, folks. That's the way it is. Of course, we're live on American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Also, if you've gone over to ochelli.com, which is OCHELLI.com, of course, the podcast is available there as well as an AFR player. So on and so forth, and however you've decided to encounter us, we do appreciate you. Anyway, going further with this Brexit discussion, Sherri Wisdom is with me, and Tony Hurst and Andy Young, both Tony and Andy, like I said, from Raconteurs News, which I think I'm pronouncing that correctly now, finally. But how you doing this evening, gentlemen? First, Tony?
I'm all good, thanks, Chuck. Thanks for having us. Hi, Sherri. All good here.
Hi, it's so nice to have you on.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Sorry about the noise and that. A bit of buffoonery there in the early hours of the morning over in the UK. All this excitement about the Brexit's got me forgetting what I should have been doing. I didn't put my headset on. Sorry about that, everyone.
No big deal. And, of course, Andy Young, who also I've done their show. They've come on here before, and we've definitely had some interesting discussions. But this one, gentlemen, you know, I feel like we had an equal opportunity to exchange information. But Andy, I think tonight you guys are going to have to educate both Sherri and myself here. What do you think?
Well, I'd love to, and thanks for having us back on, Chuck. Yeah, it's a very strange one. I mean, we've been fed this line that the government doesn't want us to go out, so quite a few people have rallied against that, and there seems to be a really strong leave vote, which I was surprised that it was anywhere near as close as it was, which would say to me that it was possibly rigged. But it's caused a massive divide in people since they've had the vote, they've gone out, or they're supposed to be leaving, but will we actually leave? I don't know, because you know it's a 2-year process, and who knows what's going to happen. And then we've got Cameron resigned, the Prime Minister, yet he's staying in office until October. So you can do a lot of damage in 3 months, can't you?
Well, yeah, that's true. And, you know, Tony, when I took a look at this discussion about these flotillas on the Thames, right? And that's why I mentioned Bob Geldof in the first hour, of course, but because he was part of the stay in the EU contingent there with this what they coined the battle on the Thames, right? You know, a little weird sort of thing that was before the vote happened. I'm surprised that the vote even happened at all, and that there's even a public discussion on this, because quite honestly, I would have figured that it was a done deal. There was nothing anybody could do in any of these alleged European nations.
Well, my take on it is we've got a lot of people out there in the alternative media that have been telling us for a long, long time that democracy don't exist. And I'm one of them. I was having it here on your chat last week with Sherri and Gillian when they was on, saying that if you still believe in democracy, well, you haven't really taken much note notice of history and that. And what's kind of shocked me about what has happened is the amount of people that all of a sudden think that democracy came back for one night last Thursday in the UK. Right? Would we really have been given that choice if there was no control over what was going on there? I'm not so sure that we would have. And as for us leaving Europe, that hasn't happened. We had a vote that is not legally binding. There's been many of those across Europe in the past, and they normally end up in another vote somewhere down the line with a completely different result after a lot of propaganda. So I'm wondering why so many people have forgotten their history all of a sudden and think that we went out there and done something great for the people of the UK, which a lot of people are saying that it is. I don't think that's what's happened at all. I don't think that the Zionists are on the run at all. I don't think that that anything different to what they wanted to happen has happened. And I'll go into that further in a bit. So
it's almost your contention that the unrest, the strife there among the population, this divide is actually something that's been manufactured for a purpose, probably, and that it really doesn't have, as you said, it doesn't have any legal standing as of yet. So is that what we're to think based on what you see?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that the basis for it all, if we look at the world economies, you've had plenty of people on your shows, we've had them on ours, top people out there that seem to know what's going on, and they all say that their economies have collapsed a long time since, and that quantity of easing is the only thing that's been holding it up, and a lot of skullduggery with the figures. Now, we know that the wealthiest people in the world control them figures. We know they control the metal markets as well and set the prices for them. So, God, I've lost my train of thought there.
Well, no, I understand. Yeah, between the manipulations of the markets, right? The propping up through quantitative easing. Of course, we know all about that in the U.S. We're continuously printing money, regardless of what it's allegedly backed by. And Sherri, you see this, from that side of it as well, right? I mean, this is exactly the economy that we live in, which, like I said earlier, and I'm kind of proud of the idea that some people have picked up on the zombie economy concept, because I literally feel as though that's the state of affairs right now. Would you agree, Sherri?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's just more and more shocking to me to find out that it really isn't limited to certain areas. It's everywhere.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing, right, Tony, is that the entire planet. See, I remember seeing that in the movie Zeitgeist. Now, look, we can argue all day about the concepts in the movie Zeitgeist, but the one very profound statement there about the monetary system in that particular section of the film, and then they cartoonized it, and gave us a caricature of the planet Earth being broke. That's just part of the reality we live in. And what have they done ever after? They have continuously printed this fictitious money to keep these things seemingly animated, but yet again with no soul and no brain really operating, just the body continuing to move. What do you think of that, Tony?
Well, yeah, you're right, and I've got my train of thought back. The banks have been classed for. I listen to Max Kaiser now and then. I know people have got different views on him, and I like to pick the meat from the bones from anyone. And quite a bit of what Max says points me in the right direction. But he's been talking about zombie banks for a long time. They're all dead in the water, and my train of thought's back, because with these collapsed economies and the seventh stage of our fiat currency system, I mean, I worked out a long time ago through a bit of reading and research that these systems go through these 7 stages and then collapse. So I'm figuring those that have been running those systems for well over 100 years now, they know the same stuff as what I do, and that they would have prepared for this collapse. Now, I don't think any president or prime minister would want this collapse to happen on their watch. They wouldn't want to be seen in history as the person that was presiding over the biggest collapse, which I think is what's out there. And this Brexit vote seems to be now having a domino effect across Europe and other parts of the world as well, I hear. So what if it's all just been set up so that the British people become the scapegoats for this collapse. And then we'd have also got another scenario where it says that this is what happens when you go it on your own. You know, we need to be part of something bigger in order to be able to work together in this modern world. I see a big setup here, a new stage being created, a problem, reaction, solution situation that does result in a one world government. I can see it there, right there.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely believe you, because look, at the end of the day, one of these figureheads is always left standing when the game of musical chairs stops. Okay, again, I take a lot of study at the Vietnam War and all of that. It's Lyndon Johnson wound up catching that particular legacy, and therefore could not even run for a second term of his own, because he had been absolutely destroyed by the Vietnam War and all of the strife that was had in this country over it. Eventually one of these criminals winds up being sacrificed, to the cause, if you will, and always one of the, in a larger sense, one of the governing bodies is always sacrificed as well. So you think that it's a possibility that maybe the English government is in fact the scapegoat or the fall guy here regarding this situation, and how the economic collapse will be sort of blamed on them because they pulled out one of the great rugs underneath the European Union's footing?
Maybe. I think it's more likely to come back to the people, though, and the fact that maybe people are too dumb to make up their minds on complicated issues like this, but I think it's deliberately complicated and people are kept dumb so that they can't make up their minds, and we end up with these big, like, chaotic events, because there's not too many people that do understand it. As everyone's saying, I'm not going to pretend for a minute I understand it all at the micro level, all the elements of what goes on there, but I understand the macro enough to know that I don't want any part of it, and I don't think it's the right way forward. But in terms of government, well, yeah, there's always got to be a sacrifice. Someone's got to go with it. But they needed a domino. They needed the one that's going to start this chain. The chain that they've known for a long time is going to occur. And I've also got another perspective on the Russia, China, and the BRICS countries, their turnout. You were talking a little bit earlier about the gold standard and that. Well, for the last 4 years or so, it's getting on for 4 years now, the Rothschilds, who set the price of gold, have been selling gold probably 20 to 25% cheaper than market value by the thousands of tons to China, Russia and India. And in that time, they've set up their own bank. They've got a currency that's going to rival the petrodollar, and they've got a whole system that's going to be backed on gold. Now, when this system collapses, people are going to want something different, and I'm sure the mainstream media will turn on the fiat currency system that we've got now and blame that, and we'll be looking for something that history says has worked for us. And I dare say that they'll ignore sovereign currency altogether, because they always do. No one wants us to know anything about that system because it actually works for the people, and we've got history that proves it. But they'll leave that out of it, and they'll go back to the gold-backed money. And it's all set up and ready, waiting for us, the other side of the world. Again, something that's going to make us all need to work together. This is how the media will paint it for us, no doubt. And we could see...
Right. And I even think that in America what we're going to have is probably a gold-backed Amero, which was the term that was thrown around for a while regarding the North American Union, and that'll be the solution after, the solution after the problem and the reaction, right? Because that once they allow the fiat currency to collapse, they're going to have to present an alternative. What do you think about that, Andy?
Yeah, I'm very much along the lines of Tony. I've guarded optimism. I like to think that, yes, it's a good thing that we got out of Europe, but I do think it's a trap that we've been led into. And when people ask me how I was going to vote, I said, well, I'm not going to vote, because it doesn't matter what you vote for. You voting for either a smack in the face or a kick in the balls, because you're not going to get anything any better than what you've already got from it. And I think my good lady said to me a few days back, she said, whatever happens, we're going to get the blame for it. We're going to be told, you voted for it, it's your stupid fault. And I think that's exactly what we've been set up for now.
Mm. Yeah, it does seem like that, doesn't it, Tony?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's more questions here as well. Like, why is it so split down the middle? I mean, it was only 52% of the people of the UK that voted to leave. If the figures are correct for the first time in a long time, that would be in any sort of major election, I would think, if they are right. But even so, we know from conversations that we have and our friends have that it is pretty much down the middle. There's a big divide there. So we've got on one side, we've got one lot of people telling you one lot of scaremongering and fear porn, and on the other side you've got another lot with another lot of scaremongering and fear porn. And somewhere in the middle of that lot is the truth. Now, when you've got a population that's been deliberately dumbed down and diverted from the realities, that doesn't really know what they're involved in, is it not a really dangerous thing to have all of those people go out to the voting system and put it down? I mean, someone was saying in the chat room there earlier, they was talking about this, you know. I think some of the reasons that I've heard for people voting either in or out have been so ridiculous that they haven't even stayed in my head. But I dare say if you do a few searches for some, you'll find some absolutely incredible reasons. Like, I did it for a protest. I didn't think this side would win. And really stupid things. It makes me wonder, what is democracy even when it works? How useful is that to us? And what's the difference when you've got just 2% in it? What's the difference, or even when there's a lot in it, what's the difference between democracy and mob rule? Is there one? I don't know.
Well, yeah, democracy in its purest form is actually kind of frightening because it does mean that mob rules. And the mob is not necessarily always the best judge of what needs to be done. Let's be honest. You know, there's a reason why individuals are educated about specifics. Look, I wouldn't want everybody in the country to decide exactly how the roads need to be built. I want engineers and people that understand, you know, that particular craft to tell me about how the roads need to be built, Tony. You know, so in this way, I can see why it's good to have a representative republic where, you know, you select people based on your vote. See, there's where your democracy comes in. You have a representative who goes and takes care of it because he's probably the person who's going to execute the will of the people, best. But also protect them from their own ignorance. You know, that's the good thing about that. But, you know, what really stood out to me is not only the fact that this was divided quite evenly, but also that was a pretty small amount of disqualified votes. To my understanding, maybe I'm misinformed here, but they only had something like 26,000 disqualified votes in the UK over this. I think that's really actually a very small number compared to what normally happens. Am I wrong?
I've not looked into those figures, but I've heard that there's some inquiry going on into fraudulent votes, and that came to 35,000 what I was hearing earlier on today. So I can't really tell you whether you're right or wrong on that, but it does sound like a low number.
Yeah, no, it does seem like a low number. And it is amazing, again, that you find people allegedly voting for causes when they don't understand the cause. Do you think it's any sort of disinformation that's been put out that immediately following the vote that a whole lot of people all across the UK were looking to see what the European Union was post-vote?
Well, disinformation, most of it's all emotional. The left and the right are all running everything on emotion and fear. And people, you couldn't possibly get to the bottom of what the European Union is. You can't even get to the bottom of their rules and regulations on certain items. They've got so many laws and regulations on just selling things, labelling things up and that alone would be too much for most people to research and find out, let alone how it all runs. It's deliberately complicated to the point where no one really has got any interest in it. I doubt very much that most of our MPs in that House of Commons understand what Europe really is and how it works.
Well, yeah, that's another interesting thing. Andy, I took note of the fact that virtually nobody is mentioning that the genesis of this entire idea comes from around the time the Treaty of Rome was signed, which is in 1957, okay? And really a lot of people internationally seem to believe that the English were part of this from the beginning, but they were not. They were actually continuously vetoed by Charles de Gaulle. Fascinating kind of historical perspective there, don't you think, Andy?
Oh, yeah. I mean, although we've been part of the EU, well, we say the EU. When we went into it in 1972, we were taken in by Teddy, the paedophile. We were told we would join in the common market. And that's all we were sold it on. We were told it would just be, dropping the borders for trade, and we'd be able to travel across Europe without a passport.
Okay, now stop right there, Andy, because I want to remind people that, yes, the EEC was the cooperative at that time. And doesn't that sound familiar when we take a look at the North American Free Trade Agreement?
Yeah.
For American listeners, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying that, we're due to end up in a European Union style construct, but if you follow the parallels, you'll find that we've got about maybe 10 more years before the North American Union would emerge if we follow the same pattern. But anyway, Andy, I'm sorry to have interrupted you there, but I wanted to point that out to American listeners. Go ahead.
Well, from what I can gather, the research that I've done, the beginnings of the European Union was set out by Hermann Goering. It was either Goering or Goebbels. I get the two mixed up. And it was originally a Nazi construct. But then when you look at that, look at who backed Hitler to get him into power. It was American bankers, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, they allegedly claim that Tyson had funded the rise of the Third Reich, but yeah, they couldn't do it without the American banks. Go ahead, Sherri. What?
I have a question about that, actually. Not that I have something to say necessarily, but my understanding was, and please correct me, but is that the reason Hitler was so scrutinized and turned into such a villain is because he was actually going to be taking the main banking systems out of Germany. I could be wrong, but that was my impression.
Well, I'd like Tony to speak to that real quick.
Well, I'm pretty sure that it was funded by Prescott Bush and a few others in the early days, and then he woke up to them and got on with his sovereign currency, I believe, and went to work on the banks at a later stage, but I'm not an expert on that bit of history.
Well, various industrialists in the United States actually supported the Third Reich, from DuPont, on down, all over the place. And Prescott Bush was, of course, part of the whole, Bank of New York, our friends over there, and was actually under the Trading with the Enemies Act was actually indicted, but never prosecuted. Anyway, yeah, that's true, but Fritz Tyson did not have the economic wherewithal to fund the Third Reich, and to be honest with you, historically speaking, the complete ledger of exactly what funded the Third Reich is still as yet unproven. I surmise that with taking into account what they would call forensic accounting, you can discover that really the Third Reich was quite a bit fueled by people in America, and therefore I say that the whole Operation Paperclip thing is just us reaping what we sowed. And by us, I do mean the military-industrial intelligence complex in America. But anyway, back to it, Tony. You may not be an expert on it, but there are some aspects here that mirror what the Nazi construct was going to be regarding a unified Europe that are echoed in the EU today. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I've seen and read quite a bit that kind of points the way that it's like the Fourth Reich now, the EU. It's a continuation, that the Second World War didn't really end, or it ended on the battlefield, but it went on in a different way. So, yeah, from what I have seen and read about the subject, it does look like that.
What do you think about that, Andy?
Yeah, that's the way I see it, absolutely. When you look at the way Europe's run, it kind of, the history goes back to the Third Reich, and they seem to be a continuation of it, and the policies and what they're doing secretly behind the scenes is just a continuation of that.
Well, right, and if you go even further back, if you don't want to, necessarily pin it to the Second World War, you can go back to the First World War and the absolute devastation caused by the economic punishment of certain European nations after World War I. Okay, all of that reconstruction which was had, and reparations which were meant to be paid, and everything else. I mean, there was quite a bit of economic terrorism, in my estimation, visited upon the populations of Europe in various places. And of course, this had to do with, the after effects of war more than the war itself. I wonder if either one of you would speak to that as well. I mean, you can take this even further back, I'm sure, but I can at least trace it back to World War I if we want to get real deep on it.
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. But one thing that I'd like to bring in, we talk about the Second World War, and there's always that part of it that you're not supposed to question. And in some European countries, you will go to prison if you question the historical version of the Jewish Holocaust. What no one ever seems to talk about is the Holocaust that was perpetrated on the German people. The German people were genocided in a massive way, particularly towards the end of the Second World War. There were some absolutely unspeakable things done to the German public. You take the firebombing of Dresden, it was horrific.
Yeah, that's correct.
I think twice as many Germans were killed in the 2 years following the Second World War as were killed in the war itself, I believe.
Well, right. I mean, based on the vengeance from the Soviets, and in addition, our people here, the guy's name eludes me right now. The guy who actually planned the firebombing of Dresden and another German city, was absolutely savage. What occurred to the German people. Realistically, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were less devastating to the population than what was visited upon them by American weapons of war with the concerted firebombing of at least two German cities that I can trace historically. It's really actually quite horrendous what occurred there, and then the economic punishment post-war, both World War I and II. Okay, that's what I see. But then again, maybe my view of history is a bit askew. Of course, there was a lot of reconstruction which was necessary in Britain, because they had been bombed by the Germans in response to what was occurring, in Germany and in land that was controlled by the Germans at the time. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot of war criminals that went unpunished during World War II. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all the leaders at the time were just as much as bad as each other. There's some people out there after that making of the film, The Greatest Story Never Told, that think Hitler was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't think he was probably as bad as what history makes him out, but I don't think he was any Father Christmas either. But from what I've looked into all of them, they were all just as bad. None of them had any compassion for humanity, and they was all after what they could get out of the war.
Well, right. And look, I know we've gone a bit askew of what we were talking about initially here, but the fact is, I think historical perspective is necessary too. So, but back to it, I still can't get around the idea that we have a population that's completely unaware of what they're being manipulated into supporting or fighting against here, and we do see another sort of weapon of mass distraction being employed. I think that that's an extremely astute evaluation of what's happening here, and realistically, even with this vote, which has made a lot of noise, let's just say in the media or whatever, nothing has actually happened yet, right?
Yeah, nothing's happened, and from history, what we've seen in the past in Europe and votes like this, I don't think it will happen. I think the practicalities of getting out are just immense. I think the markets are going to show their discourse because they've got no option, because they're going down anyway and they're looking for something to blame. And I don't think we're in for a good time over this way at all. I really don't. And you're right about the historical context as well, because history could well be repeating itself here in a lot of ways. We're on the brink of war, aren't we? You know, Europe and Russia and China, all what's going on. It's incredible nonsense going on out there, chest beating from all parties and that. You know, we need to be really careful what we get into. What frightens me about the way people are voting and they look at this sort of thing, it's more like a sport than something serious, you know, to a lot of people. They got sides. I'm on this side, you're on that side, and they doggedly defend their position, their teams, and really they've got no idea what they're doing. It is quite frightening. It really is.
Right, shallow sentimentality dictating the public performance of the populations, you know, and what does that sound like? Whoops, I almost think I see that combination of 1984 and Brave New World once again.
Yep.
But maybe it's just me, you know. And you know, Sherri, what would you like to ask at this point in the discussion?
Well, I guess it just seems still. I know we kind of talked a little bit about this, but Tony had mentioned something in the chat when I said, does this mean that the economic system is going to be affected? You know, that they're going to actually pull out of that. And I know that that's been part of the discussion, saying, well, they're just, you know, reuniting and doing all of these ties and all these other things. But what was your opinion, Tony, when we were saying it seems like from the outside that it's a big slap in the face to the powers that be, even if that's just a manipulation? Yeah,
well, I don't think it is, because they can manipulate it more or less any way that they want it. The City of London, which is kind of the Vatican, if you like, and the same sort of thing, the Crown Corporation and all the rest of them, that they're the pinnacle of the world's financial markets. There's the fraud centre of the world in terms of finance. There's so much goes on here in that department. I can't see that making any difference. You know, the only difference that's going to be made is that things will be pulled down quite deliberately as part of the process that's already occurring, that's been occurring for, you know, nearly 10 years now. This collapse has been going on. That's how long the juggling act's been going on. So, again, we won't be out of any entrapment with that. None of us will, until we get rid of usury and move to a system of money like a sovereign currency. Then none of us are going to be free of any of it, even if we get out of Europe, even if we wake up tomorrow and they said, right, that's it, you're out, we've sorted out all the paperwork, it's done. We've still got a government that works for corporations and banks, and it is still controlling everything. We've made not a lot of progress, not really.
Yeah, see, I think that once the only way that anything can be noted as progress here is if we're able to release the stranglehold from what I consider to be the triad of power on the planet. Now, a lot of people argue with me about this, so bear with me a second. You take a look at the City of London, you take a look at the District of District of Columbia in America, and you take a look at the Vatican. Okay, this is literally the triad of the stranglehold, which seems to have the reins of economic power across the planet. These are the headquarters, at any rate. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of the puppeteers reside in those cities, but these seem to be the points of pivot that one can draw on the world map. You know, and that's the reality. Until we break that stranglehold, we're going to continue to see these controlled demolitions of economies, of populations, of their welfare, their well-being, through the usury system, through the banking system, which is absolutely controlled by that triad. I mean, what do you think of that, Tony?
I think you're spot on, Chuck. You know, what sovereign currency, that's to me is the only, out of all the things that I've looked at, that to me is the only answer out there that will really work for the people and get rid of all of these parasites out of our life, because that's what we're basically dealing with as normal working men and women. We're dealing with parasites just leching off of us constantly, and most of that just comes from usury and commercialisation and want. But with a sovereign currency, I think we can get rid of that, or most of it.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Andy?
I think Tony's spot on there. He's looked into the currency side of it a lot more than me, and the sovereign currency does seem to be the way to go. Because, like you say, we're just so heavily controlled by the usury. But one thing I would like to bring up, you said about people really having no clue what they're voting on. And I've got a bit of a contradiction here, because you mentioned about the Google results, the Google Trends. I did a test on Google Trends the other week. A friend and myself, we were talking together on Skype. We put the same search terms in and we got entirely different results. And we did that 4 or 5 times and we got completely different results. We were showing each other on a screen share on Skype, so we knew we weren't pulling each other's leg. And then, after about 5 search terms, suddenly we got the same results. So I think most of us are aware that Google tailors search results to what you believe in or what you think, because it's already got a model of how you think. But then again, so I'm saying that being such a popular search, I'm questioning that, because I don't think that there are so many people who've got no idea what the EU is. Having said that, a friend of mine went to the tip the day after the vote, talking to a young lad, and said, "How did you vote yesterday?" He said, "I didn't vote because I don't know what the EU is." So, bit of a contradiction there, but I don't believe there are that many people that uninformed.
Well, see, it's not really a contradiction, because here's the thing. These search engines and the way that these algorithms are designed at this point, you have a parallel circumstance where they are customized based on your past usage. They are customized based on a lot of other input, which is really kind of scary to me. I mean, I have conversations near my computer and suddenly advertisements turn up related to my conversations when I inputted nothing. But anyway, that kind of thing occurs on a personal level, but there are mass trends that are recognizable in the algorithms as well. And I'm not claiming to be a tech guy here, but I'm saying that both things are absolutely valid. So if there is a massive search in general, it is something that sparks a trend, like anything else. And it is observable, I think, but they are all customized at this point in order to, keep you well distracted as well. And also to track your movements and to take input from you at the same time. So there is a give and take to this. I mean, there is a bit of a parasitic aspect to the internet at this point in time. And I always ask the question, is the internet itself actually self-aware at this point? Because it does have the basis to do it, I think, but in a very rudimentary sense. Anyway, but that's a whole other discussion. But I think both of these things are valid, and I think it's plausible that there was a massive search for people to try and find information on something that was being discussed in an open public setting. I don't know, Sherri, you have any viewpoint about that?
Well, I think that, unfortunately, I think that anybody who puts your information on the internet or is using the internet, you're opening yourself up to being connected to everything. And that includes the things that maybe you don't necessarily want. as far as people not really knowing what's going on, what I have found is that even when you start to talk about it, and showing how the law is actually written, like here in the United States with the electoral vote, people still they don't get it, and they don't want to understand it, because in their minds they have a vote and they don't want anybody telling them any different, because then it shatters their entire concept of what our country is built on.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, I mean, look, if the conversation gets loud enough in public and enough people begin to look at something, a trend does form in the algorithms. You know, it's that simple. If we can cause enough of a discussion to occur, then it does skew these things, it seems. You know. But anyway, Tony, what do you think about that, though, the results there? I mean, Andy seems to think that it may not be that people were really searching for the information post-vote and all of that. But I find the timing interesting, and I really do believe that that's exactly what happened, that a lot of people suddenly decided, let me see what this is, after, of course, the vote is already cast.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chuck. I think that there's a lot of people out there wondering what the hell they just did. Loads of them. Yeah, I think you're right. They'd have been out there trying to find out what it is. But some more along the way is, if we do come out, then that's the TTIP out of the window for the UK, which would be a good thing for us, no doubt about that. And the Prime Minister's lost his job, and I'm thinking he's probably not that sad about that with the Prime Minister or President of the USA now. That's just a stepping stone job to some real powerful corporate high-flying lifestyle, as we've been seeing for many years, so I don't suppose he'll be too gutted about that. You know, I don't suppose many people here will be too gutted to see the back of him anyway. And I don't know, maybe they'll give him a job as a manager of a pig farm or something.
Oh, there you go. And then Cameron can sit there and worry about his nonviolent extremists over there, right, at the pig farm, instead of bothering us. Because don't forget, Tony. See, you guys were talking about how, you know, in some European countries it's against the law to even question the Holocaust. Well, let's face facts. If you say anything negative about the royal family in England, you could be prosecuted as well, can't you?
Yeah, you can. You can get prosecuted for an awful lot over here. You can get prosecuted for if you was to make the outrageous claim that cannabis oil cures cancer, for example, you could go to jail for that, you know. And yet we know for a fact that it does, but I can't say that. So how
is that even? Do you see? I mean, does anybody else just see how moronic this is? Here we are, the people. We're the ones who are supposed to be running our governments, but yet somehow we're not even allowed to say things that we know are true, or we're not even allowed to give people the cures for things that we, in my opinion, these people are actually creating so that they can keep people sick. I mean, the whole dynamic of it is like, how do we as a people, without creating war or, you know, stooping to the levels of what has not worked before, how do we change this? And how do we, you know, you're saying that stepping out of the European Union really isn't crap. It's just an all distraction, and I've heard that in so many different directions. So what is it as the people of the world, not just one country, what do you think that we should do?
Well, we need a revolution, but a revolution of thinking, don't we? There's not enough people out there, in my opinion, that are capable of thinking properly or critically enough to know what the actual problems are or what the possible solutions are to them problems, because those that are actually bothering to get involved are mostly wrapped up in micro elements, and you know, there's thousands probably of groups around the world fighting micro elements that all go up to the same place, to the macro. If those people were somehow be able to get together and work out a solution to the macro problem, then we might be in with a chance. But I like to be an optimist, but really, logically speaking, I'm a bit of a pessimist about this, because I really do think that not enough people care enough to do enough research into what the problems are and what the possible solutions are. I think people are more inclined to go out there and start, blaming each other for the problems, which again is part of what's happening with the mass immigration and that right across the world, not just in Europe. They're breaking up people and making it harder for them to stick together and causing divisions. How can you possibly have unity in a country like the UK? And I know there's a lot of people out there that are going to call me a racist for saying this, but this happens to be a fact, and it's logical thinking without any racism attached to it whatsoever. It's just simple stuff, really. How can you possibly have so many groups of people in such a small place and then expect to get them to agree on anything? They're so diverse, and the diversity isn't a bad thing, but if you want to move forward as a community, then you've got to have things in common, not loads of things that keep you apart. So, I don't know what the solution is, really. I really don't.
See, that's about where I'm at too. I mean, on Friday I kind of stole directly from and then added on to what Gil Scott-Heron said, which is, the revolution will not be televised, nor will it be live streamed, and it will not be brought to you by Google or Facebook. I promise you, because the revolution is within, and that's exactly what the truth is regarding how evolution can actually take hold via the revolution. But anyway, Andy, I wonder what your viewpoint is on this particular subject.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult one. For me personally, because the town that I live in has increased in population sixfold since the early 90s, when we started getting the European immigration. It's only a small market town on the east coast of England, and it's just fallen apart at the seams. They built a load of flats to cram people in. They've got little tiny terraced houses that have got mattresses strewn all over the floor, and these people are vehemently hated by the locals because it's an agricultural area, and most of the the working class people worked in the agriculture. But now
so Andy, what it is that you're one of these uneducated people that's afraid of the immigrants then, right?
No, we live in a block of flats. There's 45 flats and there's 3 English speaking families. And we said to Tony when he came up at the weekend, if they got rid of all the immigrants from here and put locals in, we'd probably move out because it would be a nightmare. The people that live here, once they realise that you're not full of hatred like most of the locals, they're dead friendly.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and really when you're talking about shuffling populations from one place to another, what are you doing? You're just adding weights to different parts of the scale. It's not a big deal, relatively speaking. It's just that when you have higher concentrations of individuals in places to the point where congestion causes, an economic stagnation, a desperation, and damage to the population directly, what you have effectively is manufactured ghettos. Okay, and that's the reality of it. It's about the concentration of the population as opposed to the origin of it to begin with. And this is what, I can't get people to wrap their minds around in the United States either. Very much with the fear of the immigration and how, it's not going to be supportable. It never was. It never was supportable because the system in and of itself was not designed to be supportable, and the fact that people are concentrated in these areas, leads to a whole new set of difficulties. And this is exactly what the problem is. I don't care where you're standing as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, back to it. I also had that question, which was an open question, in the context of the EU, right? What does that say about the ability to prosecute wars for each sovereign nation? I mean, is there any sort of provisions in the EU for that? Do we know about it? Because I couldn't find them. And if it's only economic cooperation, that's like a horse of a different color as opposed to being absorbed into the into the collective. I mean, what's the answer to that? I guess I'll start with Tony.
I've got absolutely no idea, Chuck. That's the honest answer to that. I've got no idea how we go about that. But from past experience, I think they'll just make it up as they go along, won't they? They don't, didn't we go into Iraq into an illegal war, and no one's been prosecuted for that? So they'll just do what they want, won't they?
Oh, well, then you and I totally agree, which is, doesn't matter what the rules say. They're just going to do whatever the hell they want and write it down on a piece of paper and tell us it's a law, even if it wasn't passed as a law. Yeah, that's exactly the way it's going to go. Yeah. And, Andy, what do you think about that?
Well, you mentioned about the warring aspects of it. I have heard a lot of talk that they were pushing for Britain to join the European army. They're trying to get together a European army. Now, whether that was fear-mongering to swing the vote, I don't know. But it does seem there is a push for actually getting rid of the individual nation states and it just being a United States of Europe with one government, one army, one police force. And what they'll obviously do then is, if they want total full spectrum dominance, they won't have somebody from this town policing this town. They'll be policing somewhere in Italy. So they don't give a damn if they open fire on the population because they're not people they know. And that's how they'll move people around to do that.
Which is precisely what they've done in America. Most local populations are policed by individuals who don't even live in the populations. This is exactly what goes on to create the disconnect. So you don't care about the community, you don't care about your neighbors. You're just there to execute the orders given to you. That's exactly the way it's done here. So I wouldn't see why they wouldn't implement exactly the same workable strategy in Europe, Andy.
No, and I think that's the way it's being pushed towards, whether we're going to get something different with this Brexit, whether it's going to change the dynamic, or whether it's just a convenient scapegoat for the fact that it's all ready to collapse around our ears and they just want somebody to blame and we're going to be the scapegoats. I don't know.
Well, look, gentlemen and lady, we have actually run just about out of time, and I want to give each of you an opportunity. First, Tony and Andy are from Raconteurs News, and I'd like you guys to tell the listeners where they can find your work, your website.
RaconteursNews.com. Cheers for having us, Chuck. Cheers, everyone. And can I just say that I agree. Anon 1541. Can I just put this in quick? He says we should rebuild the places that you have destroyed, in obviously referring to the immigrants and that. I agree 100%. I'm sure Andy does. We shouldn't be blowing places up. I've got nothing against immigrants themselves, and if I was in the situation that they are, I'd be running here too. I really would. Yeah, we shouldn't be blowing their places up, obviously.
Absolutely. So, also, Sherri Wisdom does a show separate from this one, which she's been regular on now the past few weeks on Mondays. And, Sherri, go ahead and tell people about that.
That's on Saturday nights from 4 to 6 Mountain Time, on PIR. And you can also find me on Facebook. So, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tony and Andy, for coming on. I know that Chuck and I really had a lot of questions, and you guys seem to fill in some gaps. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Absolutely incredible, and I'll give Andy the final word here on the broadcast tonight. But Tony Hurst, Andy Young, and Sherri Wisdom all joining me on the Ochelli-effect, and I do appreciate every one of you for coming on and helping me through this discussion. But, Andy, you want to give people a final thought before we get out of here?
I just wanted to say thanks for having us on, Chuck. We've got some great guests lined up in the near future at Raconteurs News, and we're on a bit of a roll at the moment, so check us out. But you're doing a great job there, and it's been great to speak to you again, and speak to you first time, Sherri.
Well, absolutely, and thank all of you for taking a listen to the Ochelli-effect here, which is done for tonight. But tomorrow I'll be back with Intense Info Tuesday, and hopefully we'll have everybody all lined up. Who knows, we may wind up having to discuss this with J.P. Satilli tomorrow night, or Roger Landry, or both, but we shall see. Again, Tony Hurst, Andy Young, and Sherri Wisdom all with me tonight on the Ochelli-effect. Guys, stay tuned for Vinny Eastwood up next here on American Freedom Radio. We'll see you tomorrow.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the war in the Persian Gulf. You know my favorite part of that war? It's the first war we ever had that was on every channel plus cable. We like war. We're a warlike people. We like war because we're good at it. And you know why we're good at it? Because we get a lot of practice. This country's only 200 years old, and already we've had 10 major wars. We average a major war every 20 years in this country, so we're good at it. And it's a good thing we are. We're not very good at anything else anymore. Huh? Can't build a decent car. Got no steel industry left. Can't educate our young people. Can't get health care to our old people. Now, you probably noticed I don't feel about that war the way we were told we were supposed to feel about that war, the way we were ordered and instructed by the United States government to feel about that war. You see, I tell you, my mind doesn't work that way. I got this real moron thing I do. It's called thinking. And I'm not a very good American because I like to form my own opinions. I don't just roll over when I'm told to. Sad to say, most Americans just roll over on command. Not me. I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. Zero. Nope. And I don't take very seriously the media or the press in this country, who in the case of the Persian Gulf War were nothing more than unpaid employees of the Department of Defense, and who most of the time function as kind of an unofficial public relations agency for the United States government. So I don't listen to them. I don't get all choked up about yellow ribbons and American flags. I consider them to be symbols, and I leave symbols to the symbol-minded.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.